Welcome back to another episode of the Jessica Ella podcast. I'm your host, Jessica Ella, Australia's leading women's trauma therapist and founder of Aruka Therapy. And today's episode is actually for the coaches, the therapists, the healers, the practitioners who are working with people and their mindset and their minds. I haven't done an episode like this before, but I know that a lot of people who follow along are in the industry. And so I felt like it would be a really good idea to actually direct an episode to those of you who are listening who fall into that category. So the things that I want every therapist, healer, coach to know about working with humans and about working with their minds. And I want to start with probably one of the biggest, I don't want to say misconceptions, but the biggest thing that kind of goes around in the industry is that we don't have to access the past in order to heal. And in my very blunt opinion, this comes from the fact that not a lot of people actually know how to process the past correctly. And so we avoid what we don't know how to do and we say, no, that's not necessary. We can work around it. And actually, a lot of the time, there's this uncomfortableness as practitioners to going into trauma that we think is big and heavy, and we are afraid of what's going to happen if we go into it. There is so much fear. And I have clients who have come to me who are working with a psychiatrist, who are medicated, who are working with a psychiatrist, but they've been with that psychiatrist for maybe 5-10 years and they're not getting any better and they want to try something different. And there are a lot of people out there that have said, my psychiatrist or my psychologist said that this is dangerous, that I shouldn't be, my trauma is too big for me to be going back into it. And I shouldn't revisit that trauma because it's going to re-traumatize me. It's going to bring that trauma up. It's going to be too emotional. It's going to be too much for me to handle. And the truth is, this is rooted in the fact that the perception of this therapist is that the trauma is too big. And I guess the blessing, for those of you who don't know my history, you can listen to episode 1. I was sexually abused throughout my entire childhood by my father, raped by him, raped by my grandfather, tortured by the two of them. I was bullied in school. I have had an enormous amount of trauma. My entire childhood, teens and 20s was just riddled with complex trauma. And then the result of that, like just so much abuse in relationships, so much betrayal, so much pain, problems in friendships, like everything just rippled on from this awful childhood. And so when somebody comes to me and says that they've had this awful, horrific trauma that a psychologist or a psychiatrist has told them you can't go into that, I feel very comfortable going into that because I've processed it all myself and I know that it's possible. So you have to realize that the beliefs that you have as a practitioner around trauma, around your own abilities, are going to influence the impact that you can have with your clients. If you believe that memories of that scale can't be processed, they won't because you won't touch them. Whereas I believe that they can because I have that experience. And so that's what happens with my clients. Our beliefs are constantly shaping the way that we practice. There's limitations around the way that different therapists from different modalities practice because of the way that they've been taught. And what I always like to think about is the fact that who you've been taught by is just another person who had their own belief systems and their own bias. Even research is bias because they're trying to prove a particular point in line with their own belief systems. The same research by two different people can have two different outcomes because they're looking at it from a different perspective. The same goes with modalities. You'll often be able to find out a lot about a modality by the creator of that modality, by the person. And I think a lot of the more traditional methods of counseling and psychology and psychiatry is coming from a very researched but clinical background of potentially people who don't actually have the scale or level of trauma that they're then working with. And a lot of people are really aware of this and they'll say, I can't work with you. That's too complex. It's too much trauma. I actually don't have the skills and the ability. But then there are therapists that will work with them but just say, no, we don't need to work on that. We don't need to go into that. We don't need to do that. And my argument for this is always that if you're having flashbacks and the memory is like constantly coming up in your daily life, how can it be more traumatizing to go back into the memory when you're seeing it all the time anyway, when it's literally just coming up and wanting to be processed and wanting to be seen. It's re-traumatizing not processing that memory. So when you're picking a therapist, when you're picking a modality, when you're looking at who you're learning from, you have to look at where they've been and who they've learned from and what they've learned. And this is where I really pride myself on. I've spent 15 years researching the ins and outs, the ups and downs of psychology, of the human brain, of quantum physics, of somatics, of the nervous system, of the body, of the subconscious mind, of how the brain works, of different brain waves, like literally going into the depths to understand how it all works in the beginning, just to work for myself, because the messaging for me was exactly what I said before. You don't need to go into the trauma. You're just going to need to medicate and learn ways to manage the trauma. It's too complex. It's just something that you'll learn to live with. And as I've said in many other episodes, that was just never good enough for me. I wanted to find a way to actually fix it and to heal it. And I refuse to believe that what happened to you in your childhood has to just stay with you forever. That, you know, that card that you drew and that all of those things that happened to you have to be who you are for the rest of your life. And so I believe that like this message and this narrative of you don't have to go back into it, it's too complex, it's dangerous to go back into it, is coming from people who don't understand it. So the way that I work with my clients is that I understand, as somebody who's suffered so deeply for so many years, that I just want to be fucking better, and I want to be better as quick as possible. And so the current trauma-informed way of working, the current trauma-informed framework, yes, it's powerful for people who don't have the tools to work with, you know, your body and to do somatics and to work with the nervous system and the subconscious and to process memories. But for anybody who does know how to do that, the framework doesn't work, because I hear people all the time saying you need to build safety and connection and trust with your complex trauma client before you can actually start to do any sort of deeper work. And some people even say that you just can stay at that level and you can be that safety and that trust for that person. That to me is just a human being relying on their therapist to regulate them and validate them for the rest of their life. That's not healing, that's management. And so we actually need to understand how to properly heal. And so for me, this comes back to working with those 4 pillars of healing. It comes back to, if you're not working at a subconscious level, you're speaking to them in a beta brainwave. And so this person is telling you what they think they should say from the programs. They're speaking through the programs. When you put someone into a theta brainwave, you're going behind the program. So the first step in any work with anybody's mind is that we shouldn't just be sitting there talking to them whilst they're in a beta brainwave. There's no point, because we're speaking to their programs. We're speaking to the lens of what they think they should say. First things first, we always need to be going into a theta brainwave. We always need to be calming them down, and we always need to be getting them into that more relaxed brainwave so that we're speaking to their subconscious directly. So that's the first thing that every healer or therapist should understand. And we are getting there with the more standard types of mental health assistance and help in psychology and psychiatry, where they're actually starting to realize that we need to ground people. We need to get them to close their eyes. We need to relax them before we have these conversations. It's one step forward, but it is a whole different ballgame again to get someone into a deep theta brainwave. So we need to be working with the subconscious. And again, this is where a lot of people practice in somatics and breath work and things like that, and they're still not actually getting somebody. They're just working then with the body. They're not actually getting them into that theta brainwave so that we can be in this hypnotic-like state to process things visually whilst we're processing them somatically. So we actually need to be blending these things together if we want the whole body and mind to come together and to have this understanding that the thing that happened is now in the past. The idea for any person is for them to be able to understand that that was then and this is now. And when you have clients with trauma, they don't understand that that was then and this is now, because when the trauma is activated, the part of their brain that keeps time goes offline. And so the then feels like the now, and they feel like they're back in that moment. So we have to be able to go back and we have to be able to process that using their body, using somatics, using the nervous system and regulating the nervous system so that they can know that that memory is safe. So the thing that I really want to bring it back to is that the person is coming to you because they've hit a point where they realize that they really need help. They don't need 6 sessions of getting to know you before you get into the deeper work. So where this comes from, again, is a lack of understanding in the way that complex trauma clients work. Yes, they can be quite untrusting, quite hesitant. But a lot of the time, this building of trust relationship actually ends up in them becoming attached to the therapist and reliant on the therapist instead of actually ever being able to get to the deeper work. So the way that I actually work with my clients, the level of conviction that I have in being able to help somebody is that when they come to me, I say to them, what is the worst thing that's ever happened to you that is causing you the most pain and suffering? We're doing that first, because I want to show your brain that if we can fix that in one session, it's going to open up the possibilities for everything else that you're suffering with. We go there first. And some people are afraid of that, and we talk about what it brings up and what might happen, and we work through that before we get to it. But for a lot of people, it's just this sigh of relief. They're like, oh, I normally spend months of like working up with a therapist, getting to know them and building safety before we even start any of the practices. And they start to lose hope, or they get bored, or they pull out right before it gets to the part where they do the work, because that's their pattern, right? To protect themselves from going into it. So actually by building safety and trust, we're just allowing them this space to have time to pull out before they actually get to the hard stuff. But also we're not really ever showing them what's possible. And they sometimes will, as I said, lose hope. So for me, going into it first and showing them what's possible and giving them that evidence. And I even say to them, like, don't book in your second session yet. Wait a week and then try and think back onto that memory and feel how it feels. And once that's shifted and your brain goes, holy shit, this works, then come back. And they always do, because it works. So I think that this idea that we have to build up this relationship is based off of a model that just is very gentle and can be great for some people who just want to have a chat each week and who just want to unload but don't have this past trauma and these things that they're actually trying to move through that are like patterns and beliefs and traumas. So that's the first thing, is actually understanding how it all works so that you can, and if you don't understand how that works, then in my opinion, you shouldn't really be working with people. I mean, there are so many coaches out there who are coaching people through things with no understanding of how humans actually work. They're coaching them and pushing them and thinking that this framework of like accountability is going to get them to like move forward. The amount of coaches that have done my certification because they realized that no one was changing is like probably out of 150 people in the last few years, it would have to be close to 90 coaches, because they get into it. And the people who actually care about results and actually care about people go, hold on a minute, me telling them what to do each week and setting these goals, they're not achieving them. They're not moving forward. Why aren't they moving forward? Why can't they just do the thing? And they're actually understanding then and going into their own research of, it's because the subconscious mind. It's because when they try and step into this new version of themselves, when they try and reach for that goal, every little part of them that says you're not worthy, you don't deserve that, you're lazy, you're, useless, whatever, you're a loser, you fail at everything that you do, all of these childhood wounds and teenage wounds of things that a teacher has said or things that they've collected over their lifetime, those get triggered as they try and step into and do something new. And it's not conscious a lot of the time. It's not like they're realizing that this is what's happening. They're just trying to do the thing, and then all of a sudden they find themselves distracted and doing something else, and they go, I don't know why I couldn't do it. I'm useless. And they'll say the words, they tell it to you. If you're a therapist who's working with somebody, in the first 10 minutes, I've got most beliefs that I need for that session, because people tell you in their words. People tell you in the way that their body moves. People tell you which thing that you ask them about makes them feel uncomfortable because they tense up or their posture changes. Like, people's bodies and their words tell you exactly what's going on underneath. You just need to actually understand which words you should be listening out for, which words are actually pulling back to a subconscious belief. There's so many subconscious beliefs that we call them sub-beliefs. So we've got a narrative, which is like a story we tell ourselves. We've got a sub-belief, which is like I am or I have. And then we've got a core belief underneath that, which is one of the like most base human beliefs that most of us have when it comes to suffering, which is I'm alone, I'm not safe, I'm not loved, I'm not worthy. And it always comes back to one of these really deep core beliefs. But we have these sub-beliefs and we have these narratives. And to be able to identify that in people, the whole work here is listening to what they're saying and understanding where that comes from and actually taking the words. And this is where bringing those 4 pillars comes into it, where we're not just taking the words and shifting them using hypnosis. We're actually using a visualization process. We're actually connecting with them energetically. We're actually becoming the observer and using the observer effect in quantum physics to watch those words leave and that energy leave that person's body. So the energy that makes up those words, the energy that makes up that memory, we're shifting that and we're watching that and we're observing that. This is where a lot of modalities miss the mark in that we're just doing it logically for the brain, but we're made up of energy. And so just working with the brain has its limitations. Just working with the body also has its limitations. I could work with somebody who we could process traumatic memories, we could shift subconscious beliefs, we could do all this work in their brain and their body will still be stuck in fight or flight. Their nervous system, they'll still wake up every morning with anxiety because we haven't paired it all together. And this is what took me 15 years to understand, is that we need to be blending all of it together at the exact same time. And finding a way to do that was very difficult, like a seamless method that really incorporates everything. And that's what Aruka is, that it's that method, it's that understanding, it's that depth. And so actually understanding why we do what we do, the patterns that we have, the sabotage, elements, and how they're not actually to anything to do with that person, but to do with their past. I know so many therapists that get frustrated. I had this client and she just keeps coming back and she's doing the same thing and she's in a bad relationship. And one of my favorite shows is it's on Apple TV. It's called Shrinking. And they have this same issue of like people coming back with the same problems, like people having these barriers of opening up and communicating, and their clients won't be vulnerable with them. They won't tell them what the problem is. They're constantly deflecting, or they're dumping the problem at the end of the session when there's no more time to work on it. Or there's all of these blocks that are coming up in a lot of therapies that people just don't know how to navigate. And one of the biggest things that I learned in working with people is that what you're really working with every single time that you come up against a block, every single time that you come up against a pattern, is protection. All we're trying to do is protect ourselves. And our subconscious is designed for survival. It's not designed to make you happy. Your brain, the subconscious mind and the mind which makes up the brain is like, it's not designed for you to live your best life. It's designed for survival. Your biology is wired for survival. And so anytime you make a change, the subconscious is like, well, this path that we're on, we know how that goes. And when we know how something goes, it feels more safe because that feels like it's a sure path. Change, therefore, to the subconscious mind feels unsafe. And so anytime that you're working with somebody and you're trying to make a change, whether that be in a pattern, in a behavior, in their life, in changing the person that they're attracted to, in relationships, whatever it is, there's going to be resistance that comes up because it's protection. And once you flip it and you think of it as, instead of it being frustrating or instead of it being, is it this, is it that, if you think about it in terms of protection, the number one thing that we're always going to then need to uncover is, what's the fear? What are you protecting yourself from? So if we go, okay, this client is constantly deflecting, I would be asking that client, what's the worst thing that could happen if you actually opened up to me? What's the worst thing that could happen if you actually told me what the real fucking problem is? And they're like, oh, okay. And we start to talk about what's your brain actually trying to protect you from here? What's the worst case scenario that could happen if you opened up and you were vulnerable and we actually went into the real problem? What is the worst thing that could happen? And they're like, oh, well, I could open up this can of worms and I could get really depressed. And then what happens? And then I won't leave bed. And then what happens? And then I might become suicidal and then I might die. And a lot of the time it comes back to I might die, which sounds so extreme. Even for people that are like, I don't know if I should leave my job. And it's like, okay, what would be the worst thing that could happen if you left your job? Well, I don't know what I would do then. And then I'd have no money. I could end up homeless. If I was homeless, I'd be depressed and then I'd be suicidal. And then like our brain is so extreme. And when I reflected back to them, I'm like, so do you actually think that if you change jobs, you'll die? They're like, probably not. But that's literally the way that the subconscious is wired. And that's the shit that's underneath that we just don't even realize is there. There is like, and I might ask this person consciously in a conversation, what do you think is the worst thing that could happen? They're like, oh, nothing really. I'll just find another job. You go into their subconscious, you get them into a theta brainwave, and all of a sudden it opens up this world that they didn't even know was there. And people say, I didn't even know that that's what I actually felt. I didn't even know that that was even a thing. They're like, I didn't even know that that was there. I didn't even know that that was something that I was thinking, or that was, and that's the whole point, is that we don't know what's there. We don't know what's underneath the surface, and we're not designed to know because we're designed to protect ourselves. So we just think these thoughts. And if we were to uncover this and we were to shift it, then we might change. And that's really scary. But what happens is once we actually get down there and we find that fear and we shift that fear and we're like, okay, could I just remove that belief of if you move jobs, you're going to die? And they're like, yeah, that sounds a bit silly. Cool, let's move that. And let's also remove this belief that like you're going to end up suicidal. Let's almost remove these beliefs. Now, how do you feel about telling me what's really going on? Now, how do you feel about this situation? Oh, I feel like I could do that. What else is there? And we start to uncover and start to unpack, and they just start to realize that actually it's not the thing that they think it is. It's never, ever, ever when you work with the subconscious mind and you go to those deeper layers, it's never what is presenting superficially. It's always protection. Protecting yourself from other people, protecting yourself from yourself, protecting yourself from death. And it sounds so crazy that it comes back to that, but it does always come back to this aloneness, not loved, and therefore subsequent death or loss of time or loss of life. And so if we flip that, we think that all we really want to do is feel alive and we want to make the most of our time here. And that's the goal that I'm trying to move every client towards. How can you live the most full life? How can you really embrace your time here feeling alive and free? And we're moving them towards that. So I've gone off on a few tangents here. There is so much more that I want to say to healers, coaches, therapists, to everyone out there in the industry. If you have any questions though, please send them in. I often do question boxes on social media. Send them in and I'm more than happy to go into specific subjects that you want to know more about. So if you know somebody who needs to hear this, please send them this episode and I'll see you in the next episode.